damn it, it was upside down. I want it to be like this. This is hands down the most expensive laptop I've ever bought in my entire life, by far. Welcome back to the channel, guys. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the brand new M1 MAX 16-inch MacBook Pro. My previous MacBook before this was the Intel-based MacBook. I had the Intel i9 MacBook Pro with a terabyte of SSD and 32 gigabytes of RAM with 8 gigs graphics card. And as my workflow has kind of increased as a director and producer, and also starting to get into 3D modeling, I basically believed it was time for an upgrade. So as my workflow has kind of increased, I definitely kind of tested the limits on my previous MacBook. I was essentially just using 4K video files, but I kind of found out very quickly that my MacBook was not able to handle too many applications at once. And like I said, I used that computer for the last 2.5 years, and it did a great job in terms of handling what I needed it to do. But as my workflow kind of increased in terms of the type of videos that I'm essentially starting to produce, and essentially just overall the heavier applications that I'm starting to kind of now get into, it was basically time for an upgrade. But the question is this brand new M1 Max that's fully spec'd out worth the money? So jumping right into it, guys. So first of all, the actual physical appearance, this brand new M1 Max is definitely a lot thicker compared to the Intel i9. It definitely has more weight to it. But just kind of right off the bat, what we do have now is basically, we have a MagSafe charger. To be honest, I'm actually a bigger fan of that compared to the regular USB-C plug-in, because with the MagSafe, it's obviously magnetic. So in terms of being able to plug it in and plug it out, super easy. And in the situation where if somebody accidentally trips over it, the wire basically comes out without a problem. Whereas with my previous Mac, you always kind of ran the risk of pulling the wire and also pulling your Mac at the same time. Going from there, we have basically 3 Thunderbolt ports. We have 2 on the left side, and we have 1 on the right side. We have a regular audio jack here, and then switching over to the other side, we have our SD card and we have our HDMI input. So right off the bat, the thing that got me the most excited, and I think a lot of people would probably agree with me, is that having an SD card on a MacBook is honestly a lifesaver. Because I've had many situations where I've been on shoots before where I brought my MacBook. Just remember that I basically forgot my dongle at home to be able to put my SD card in, and I would be like, how in the hell is this, like, why am I dealing with this problem in 2020? But now we're in 2022, and that is no longer the case. The second thing in terms of the actual appearance of it, one big thing to notice is obviously there's no more touch bar. So I personally never really used the touch bar whatsoever. I mean, I kind of found it to be kind of like more of a gimmick. Like, it was cool to kind of look at, but in terms of the actual application of using it, I maybe used it a handful of times. But in terms of like my editing workflow and stuff, I kind of found it pointless. The next thing that I want to definitely talk about is this notch. I remember about 2 years ago when rumors were coming out about this new design, everybody was kind of losing their mind over the whole notch. And to be honest, like, after using it for like 3 or 4 days, you kind of forget about it. The only time I'll ever really experience seeing the notch is when I'm on my desktop screen. But like, for example, if I'm in Safari and I go into full screen mode, that notch completely disappears, which I think is a really good kind of add-on, because I could definitely kind of see it being distracting. But overall, like, I don't mind it, maybe because I don't really notice it. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of the actual physical features of the laptop are the speakers. The speakers are absolutely insane. Like, on my previous MacBook, the speakers were pretty good and I didn't really have any issues with it. But just seeing how Apple is and like how much they've actually upgraded the speakers, I've been actually finding myself using the speakers a lot more compared to with my previous Mac, where I'd basically plug in like an audio jack and have my actual headphones in. In terms of the trackpad size, it's pretty much the exact same size as the previous Intel Mac, so that was not much really of any difference there. The keyboard here, the keyboard is definitely a much more improvement. I like the fact that these keys are still relatively flush, but it still has a bit of a tactile feel to it. I find that compared to my previous MacBook, I'm making a lot less typos using this keyboard. In terms of the actual keys, you kind of have essentially your regular keys here. Obviously now without your touch bar, you do have a little bit of limitations. So for example, like if you want to turn on the backlit keyboard, you actually have to go into your mission control settings here, go into the keyboard brightness, and that's actually where you can adjust it to turn on the backlit keys. One of the main reasons why I got this new laptop was basically for the screen. This is a mini XDR Retina display with 128Z ProMotion refresh rate. And right off the bat, I could definitely notice that things just feel a lot smoother. Just scrolling, reading, scrolling between images, kind of watching certain videos. The overall experience, like open up applications and stuff, just feels a lot more smoother compared to the previous MacBook that I initially had. Since we're on the topic of the screen, the next thing that I want to also mention is the bezels. The bezels are a lot thinner compared to my previous MacBook, and to be honest, I actually very much like that, because I find that when I'm working, especially on my laptop without like an external display, having thinner bezels kind of makes it more immersive, and just being able to be more immersed in the content that you're working on, especially on the road, is definitely super important for me. And lastly, in terms of the actual physical differences that I noticed with this laptop compared to my previous MacBook is the battery life. I can go through a full day of editing, about 7 to 8 hours of intensive editing, and I will still have battery left over, whereas with my previous MacBook, I could get through maybe like 4 or 5 hours doing like 4K videos, and I'd basically have to plug in my actual charger to continue doing what I was basically working on. Now let's kind of talk about the speed. So kind of like one of the first benchmark tests that I like to do is to kind of look at the read and write speeds. Now you're probably wondering, well, what exactly does read and write speeds have to do when it comes to buying a laptop? And to be honest, having fast read and write speeds is actually very important. So kind of in a nutshell, what read and write speeds basically determine is how well your laptop or your computer is able to basically process large files, open up applications, load time between applications and such. So here's the speed test for Blackmagic in terms of the read and write speeds of this new M1 Max. And as you can see, the speeds that I'm getting here are absolutely nuts. So I'm just gonna pause it right there. So as you can see here, for my write speeds, I'm getting 6,009 megabytes per second, whereas my read speeds are at 5,358.9 megabytes per second. So as you can see, the actual speed test in terms of the read and write speeds for this M1 Max is absolutely insane. Like, I've never had a laptop that has been able to output that much power. Now the question is, well, who's actually going to be able to utilize all that power? Right off the bat, if you're not doing any heavy intensive work in terms of media production in the form of video, photo, or music production, you don't need this power. That's simply it. Like, if you're basically using your laptop to kind of just send emails, create Word documents, maybe edit a few videos here and there, by all means, the M1 Max is completely overkill. Now, on the flip side, if you're doing heavy media production in the form of video, such as editing 4K, 6K, even 8K videos, this laptop can handle it without an issue, at least on paper. I'm probably gonna make a separate video where I specifically look into the actual video editing aspects of this laptop to see what it's capable of. But in terms of the read and write speeds and essentially the other specs I have for this, this thing should be able to handle 8K footage without any problems. All right, guys, the next thing I want to talk about is the memory of this laptop. Now, for the majority of people, I would probably say 95% of the population, 64 gigabytes of RAM is overkill. And I will admit, 64 gigabytes of RAM for myself is actually overkill. But there's a reason in terms of why I spec'd out my RAM to the highest available option. Whenever I buy a new MacBook, the first thing that I always consider is how can I basically future-proof it, not just from a perspective of it actually lasting, but also from the perspective of being able to resell it in the future for a pretty decent price. Secondly, in terms of my own personal workflow, I am always constantly doing multiple applications at once. So for example, I've had many situations before where I would work on a batch of 4K video files and begin rendering them, and then quickly jump into Lightroom and start editing, let's say, a batch of like 450 to maybe 1,000 photos, putting in like certain type of basic adjustments or kind of certain type of preset LUTs on top of it. And with my previous Intel i9 Mac, I was not able to do that. I would try to, but my MacBook would really kind of start struggling, and the fans would come on, and overall the infamous rainbow beach ball of death would show up, and it was just not a fun experience. But with this laptop, with the specs that I currently have, and also the 64 gigabytes of memory, again, like I said, on paper, I should be able to render out videos while simultaneously working on photos either in Lightroom or Photoshop without any hiccups. And again, I'm probably still not going to be maxing out the entire memory for this laptop, but the first thing that I had in mind was, what do I need to upgrade in terms of making my workflow when I'm working on multiple applications at the same time be as smooth as possible? And as soon as I saw that they had a 64 gigabyte RAM option, I was like, I'm going to go through with it. For the majority of people, 16 gigabytes to 32 gigabytes of RAM is more than enough. But like I mentioned, if you're working with heavy media application files and you're running multiple applications at the same time, the more RAM that you have, the easier your life is going to be. All right, guys, so the next thing I want to talk about with this M1 Max is the CPU and the GPU. Well, with this model, I have the 10-core CPU and 32-core GPU. And just to kind of answer the question, the main difference between your GPU and your CPU is that the CPU has to do with anything that's kind of like on your interface, whereas your GPU basically deals with any type of processing that's actually happening on the screen. So with this model, I have the 32-core GPU, which allows me to go through a lot of effects and renders with ease. And again, this comes back to the notion of basically using kind of like video production or like photo production simultaneously, I may add, and basically not experiencing any hiccups while you're kind of running multiple heavy applications at the same time. And one of the last things I wanted to basically kind of touch upon in this video is basically the speeds of these new SSDs. So I went with the 2TB SSD model, and right off the bat, in terms of being able to transfer like a few hundred gigabytes worth of footage or photos from my SD cards to my laptop, again, world of a difference. Like for example, with my previous MacBook with my Intel i9, transferring about 100 gigabytes worth of content would probably take me around 4 to 5 minutes. Whereas with this laptop, I'm able to transfer that under a minute and a half, generally speaking. Again, I'm probably gonna make a separate video where I'm basically looking at each individual aspect of video editing and also kind of file processing with this new Mac to kind of showcase some better numbers for you guys. But again, I've only had this for a month, and right off the bat, I'm noticing much faster transfer times between basically content from my SD cards to my MacBook. So all in all, guys, pretty much this new M1 Max, the 16-inch model that I pretty much spec'd out fully besides the SSD space, this thing has a lot of power. I'm probably gonna find it difficult to essentially max this out in terms of what I'm gonna be using it for. However, the type of applications and the files that I use on a daily basis definitely justified for me personally to basically purchase this. So the question is this model worth the upgrade? The only way I can really answer that question is it depends on what type of user you are. If you're a pro user like me, where you basically make a living off your laptop, this thing is a no-brainer to upgrade to. The amount of power this thing packs is insane, especially for the form factor. Like the fact that I can carry this around with me mobile and like plug it into like an external monitor, or just work at it like at a coffee shop and have this much power packed into this form factor is a huge plus for me, because that allows me to basically work on large files on the go. Now, in the instance where you're less of a heavy production user, in the sense like, you use your laptop for more kind of regular day tasks, such as like emails, like writing emails, sending out Word documents, maybe like editing a few photos or videos, then the reality is you're probably better off just basically buying the M1 Pro models, or even the MacBook Air models with the new M1 processor. The M1 Max models, whether it's fully spec'd out or not, is really designed for professional users that basically do heavy type of video, photo, or music production. If you find yourself in that area, then this laptop is a no-brainer. So all in all, guys, the new MacBook Pros with the M1 Max chip is definitely a very exciting leap forward in terms of what laptops are capable of. It's definitely a night and day difference compared to the Intel-based model of MacBooks that were released back in 2019. Anyways, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. I hope this video kind of gave you guys some direction in terms of, is it worth purchasing a laptop that's kind of fully spec'd out based off your current workflow and what you essentially do, and if it's essentially too much. And again, for me, this model that I have, it's almost fully spec'd out besides the SSD. The amount of power this thing packs is absolutely insane. I have a hard time seeing myself being able to even max it out, but just knowing that I have that much power readily available gives me a lot of confidence in terms of working in the future when I'm basically dealing with heavy video production files, while also simultaneously working on other applications at the same time, to essentially kind of save time and essentially deliver finalized products for my clients or my work that much quicker. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and comment and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.